Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Of course. I've been on your site this morning and I'm blown away by what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. How'd you get into this?
Got into it because I thought I was going to med school for a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm like the classic, was at BYU, headed to med school.
Yeah.
And as part of going to med school, BYU tells you, hey, we want you to get as many research hours and service hours and all that stuff. So as a freshman years ago, I started into some research hours, joined a lab with who's now my co-founder, Tim Jenkins, and started into some research, fell in love with research for Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's and ALS and all that stuff. And it kind of all started from there at BYU, from a lab at BYU. And we grew it and spun it out a few years later. And then it kind of grew into the company we have today.
How's it going?
Good. It's going really well.
Yeah.
It's been awesome.
Did you take funding?
We have. Yeah. We are just now closing about a $23 million Series A.
Congrats, dude. That's huge.
Yeah. And we're scaling up operations in PG, opening up a 20,000 square foot lab. And yeah, we're kind of off to the races a little bit.
Good for you, man.
Yeah. Thank you.
So cool.
Thank
That's
you.
so cool. What do you think of this? You see the Neuralink thing with that guy with ALS? I think he might be Utah.
Yeah. I have seen some of that
Is he
stuff.
a Utah guy, I think, or something like that.
Yeah. I'm not sure if he's a Utah guy, but I've seen it. Yeah.
What do you think of that? Do we have a cure? Could we cure ALS?
You know what's amazing about a lot of these neurodegenerative diseases is I think could cure them if we knew how to get people treatment sooner. That's the whole issue with these diseases. Most people aren't aware about it, but Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, they're these progressive disorders and you're sick well before you know it. So your neurons are dying for years. With Alzheimer's disease, it's maybe even decades before you ever know that you have symptoms. ALS is a little quicker, but there's a number of FDA approved treatments and really, really impressive therapeutics. Neuralink is part of it, but I mean, we're biased, but I think it's more of if we knew who was sick earlier, we'd be able to cure it completely. And so that's kind of what our passion is at our company.
Yeah. How do you detect it super early? So tell people like the name of your company and like kind of the whole idea behind it.
Yeah. So our company's Renew Biotechnologies. We specialize in diagnostic development. So we specialize in specifically looking at this biomarker called methylation. So most people are familiar with like your genome, right? Everyone's like, yeah, I know what DNA is. I know, I'm familiar with 23andMe and Ancestry and things like that. We focus on things that are bound to the DNA and kind of control how it's regulated, things like that. So one of those things is called methylation. And our company is 100% focused on using that little biomarker, that little kind of residue to be able to interpret disease. And so, neurodegenerative is kind of where our company started, and it was to solve that issue. It's called the diagnostic dilemma. So it's this concept where physicians believe they have the treatments to cure diseases like Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's disease, but they can't get people treated in time because they can't diagnose them in time. And so we've been using our technology to identify disease early, and then you can get on treatment before you're sick and before it's too late.
Yeah.
So that's what our company does. Since then, we've expanded into a lot of other areas, but neuro is a big part of our company.
So what success have you seen in this? Like, I'm sure you must hear stories. I mean, something you're working on, which must feel pretty gratifying, is you're not like building another app or anything like that. Like you're actually like building something that, if successful, probably changes the world.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's our whole goal. Yeah. Is to change the world altogether. So we've seen a lot of success in our ability to correlate it with disease. And honestly, the concept of how it works it's not too complicated. So essentially when cells in your body die, whether it's, heart cell or cancer cells, or in this case, a neuron in the brain, they basically spill their guts in the bloodstream. So everything that was inside that cell, the DNA, the proteins, the lipids, whatever was in that cell ends up in the bloodstream to get degraded and broken down. And our technology is super simple. Basically, we take all the DNA that's floating around in your blood from those dead cells, and we're able to basically tell you what part of the body it came from. So we can take one piece of DNA and say, oh, that came from a heart cell, or that came from a neuron cell, or that came from whatever cell it is we're looking for. And then we just calculate how many are there, and we can understand like, oh man, you have a ton of cortical neuron DNA in your blood. And that's bad because if you have too much and it stays that way, you're going to end up with Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease is another type of neuron cell. So we look for that type of neuron cell in the blood. And that's how our technology works. So we're able to just basically identify disease by understanding what's in the blood coming from the brain. And then we can tell physicians earlier, and then they can put you on a treatment plan.
How do you get like wide adoption?
It takes some time. It does. There's a lot of effort put into like your research at the beginning. So you have to have really, really good research that basically shows clinics that you have, a working technology. So basically start with research, which is what we did for 3-4 years, right? Proving out research. And then you can move into clinical studies. And that's basically clinics around the country that say, hey, we have samples that you can test on to prove this works in a wide model. So that's the stage we're at right now. So then you do those clinical studies and you publish them in scientific journals and you share them at conferences and all that stuff. There's a lot of education that comes with it. And then after that, you can basically get your regulatory approval. And we're on track to get our regulatory approval this fall. Okay. And then finally at that point, you can start to market. And at that point, that's when it's normal. Then you get a market just like any other company and, just get in front of the right people that can purchase the test. But there's a good, 3 to 5 year time frame of, I know this works to I can actually sell it to somebody and help them.
Is there any way to speed that? Is that government efficiency or do we need that much time? Like, is that an important thing?
Yeah. I believe it's a really important thing. A lot of people would say it's a negative thing. For diagnostics specifically, it's not nearly as long of a process as maybe drugs. So drugs can take 12 to 15 years to get those approvals, and it is really delayed by the government efficiency. For diagnostics, it's not very hard because it's not something that's going into the body. We don't have nearly the same, regulatory hurdles as some other, biotech companies would. But it's still a long time, right? 3 to 5 years for something that is working. It is still a long time. And there's definitely lives that could have been saved in that time frame.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the downside, right?
Yeah, it's a downside. But the upside is we do know that on the end, nothing's getting through that isn't really, really well regulated and validated and works well. So it's kind of pros and cons. So,
what type of talent do you recruit for these days?
So we recruit largely from scientific degrees. So we have a lot of PhDs, a lot of cell biologists that are either technicians in our lab and processing samples. It's actually a requirement regulatory wise. You can't have people touch samples and process them if they don't have a science degree. And then that
seems right.
Yeah, it helps, right? So we recruit a lot of that type of talent. And then we also like to recruit really talented individuals outside of the scientific field. Some people disagree with that. We really like it because we found that when you grab someone that's really talented in SAS and teach them the science, they bring insight that is really valuable to science. Scientists and physicians love to kind of stick to their old ways a little bit. And so bringing some of the innovation from the SaaS world or the fintech world and applying those talented people to our area, we found to be really successful on the commercial side. But yeah, that's kind of what we go for.
Yeah, that makes sense. How is AI changing all of this?
It's interesting. AI is much slower in healthcare, meaning like there's some diagnostics out there that try to use these AI models to predict disease, to basically say, hey, we fed it a bunch of your, genomic data or whatever data they want to look at. And they say, you're at a high risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And this model said you're at risk. It's not super helpful to a doctor, right? A doctor's like, okay, the AI model said you're at high risk and it may have 99% accuracy, but I don't know what that means. I don't know what's broken in your body or what I'm supposed to do to fix that.
I don't know what to do with that information.
Yeah, so it's interesting information. There's a lot of really cool studies, but we haven't quite figured out how to take that AI data and turn it into what we refer to as biologically relevant data. Something where a doctor can say, okay, based off this data, I know what's broken in your body, right? Well, what do I need to fix? And we haven't quite got there yet. It's close, but we're not quite there. So AI in our space is actually, it's much more prevalent in like drug discovery and things like that. But interpreting disease, we're close, but not quite there. It's just too complex for a doctor to say, what do I do with this?
Yeah. How do you think AI revolutionizes healthcare long term? Like, not just what you're doing, but just like when I think of AI and its possibilities, it's obviously going to disrupt everything, right?
Yeah.
That's obvious.
100%.
But it does seem like healthcare in particular, there's a real opportunity for that to make huge strides.
Yeah, there is. I'm curious what regulators are going to do with it, right? Because everything's regulated in healthcare, even the process by which you bill people for an insurance code.
I know.
So I'm curious how long it's going to take for people to at least update their infrastructure to allow AI in. I personally think that's where a lot of things will be improved, is just processes will be much quicker from, going to a doctor, getting treated and moving and getting billing done. In just more traditional healthcare, what we're finding is it's opening up possibilities for more targeted. It's what we call precision medicine, right? So precision medicine is this concept where every individual should be treated in a different way. Rather than having one drug to treat everybody, you have a patient and you tailor the drug specifically to them. I think that's where AI is going to play a lot, where it can allow for much more targeted precision therapies or diagnostics rather than the approach we do today, which is hope that a drug cures everybody. And we're usually pretty good at getting about 80% there, but 20%, we miss. So
have you noticed any difference? This isn't a political show, so whatever.
No, you're good.
But have you noticed any difference between switching of the administrations?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah. Good or bad, or?
It depends who you ask. There's like, for example, everyone's heard about NIH funding, right? And how the administration came out and said, we're cutting all NIH funding. That hurt a lot of people where they were so dependent on that research phase of their company, where the government was funding the research. They had to get to a proof of concept before they could actually go out and get investor dollars.
Right.
And so people were really concerned about that. But it actually ended up turning into a positive, because at the end of the day, what the administration was doing was trying to reduce how much universities were taking away from researchers. And it was this crazy story about every university basically has overhead that they collect from the government. So if you're a researcher at a university, which is where 99% of innovation in healthcare actually comes from the university. And so in that case, when someone at BYU would win a grant, basically BYU would say, hey, we want 50% on top of that. And so the government, in order to give a researcher $100,000 to do his study, would actually have to pay $150,000.
Because the school's taking a cut.
Because the school said we need a cut.
Yeah.
And so that ended up in billions of dollars actually going to profit the university, and the overhead fees were getting way too high. Some universities, like the Harvards and Stanfords of the world, were closer to 85, 90%, even pushing 100% overhead.
It's actually so wild.
And so they came out and said,
that's fraud.
Hey,
that's correct.
I know we scared you about NIH. We're not cutting that. We're actually just requiring all the universities to go to 15% across the board. So it actually put more money into the researchers' hands. So, the tactics are interesting, but so far things have been a positive.
The outcomes have been great. Yeah. What about like Kennedy? Is he controversial in your world?
Not
HHS guy?
Yeah, not too much.
Yeah.
At least specifically to research and diagnostics, we don't overlap much with that one. So,
what does a typical day look like for you?
So early on, I was a scientist. So my typical day we had 3 guys at the company. We were all researchers, and every day it was at the bench, which is just like the table where we're actually like, using the chemicals and pipetting samples and stuff. And that was my day. Every day was just performing in the studies to show that this technology actually could diagnose disease. That's shifted quite a bit for me, where I'm not a scientist on my day to day anymore. And now it's just management, really.
Do you like that? Or
I
do you
actually
miss
do.
the science?
Yeah, I do. So when we first started the company, I wasn't planning on being the CEO. I was planning on staying on the science team. And as the company grew and we went out to get funding and tell our story, I found that I loved telling our story, and I loved sharing kind of the issues of the world and how we were going to change it, and found that I loved pushing people towards a goal. The other thing I found is when we hired other scientists, I found that I am not the best scientist in the world. I'm okay. So I found that we were a much better team when we had just phenomenal scientists doing the work that I used to do. And I just got to focus on pushing the narrative and the story and the products we want to develop. So yeah, it's something I definitely learned about myself. And I'm loving it. So
how many employees do you have now?
We're at 35. So
that's like 100.
Yeah, I mean, it feels
pre-COVID, like, pre-AI, pre all that. You know what I mean?
It feels like a
big.
lot. Yeah, and that team grew pretty quickly recently. So I mean, we were a lean team for a long time, and then we finally got to launch some of our products last year. So we grew to 35. And we'll probably end up at about 50, 55 by the end of the year, and to us, that feels huge. It's surprising how much you can process with robotics and AI and all that stuff integrated. And that's something that's been really big for our new lab. So we're opening this new state-of-the-art 20,000 square foot lab, and it's designed to be able to process millions of samples in a year. I mean, thousands and thousands a day, and you can run it just off, a staff of 15 technicians, which, today with that type of technology, one technician can process thousands of samples in a day on their own, just because all they're doing is loading things on a machine and pressing play, and the whole process is automated. Before, I mean, even 5-10 years ago, every technician could do about 200 samples a day. I mean, we're 90xing what one person can manage just by incorporating all that stuff from the start. So hopefully we should never need a massive team, because we can operate pretty efficiently.
Where's this warehouse going to be?
So it's in Pleasant Grove. So if you're driving off that exit, there's like the Tesla right off that exit. It's right there. So it's just a boring old brick building right behind that Tesla. And most people, when they walk through it, they're like, man, I had no idea this was even here. Yeah. So that's where we're at, right off that exit.
What's it been like to build this in Utah? What have been the advantages or disadvantages to that?
So advantages is Utah's actually it's the third quickest growing biotech hub in the country and the world. I mean, the U.S. dominates healthcare and biotech. And Utah's always been known as kind of this sleeper giant. We have some massive diagnostic labs here, like bioMario or ARUP. We have Myriad Genetics. There's just these monsters that are here. So it creates a really awesome talent pool for us. But also there's just a good, just kind of community of people in the same space. So most people don't know it, but biotech is growing quickly. We're actually outpacing, the typical hotspots in Boston and San Diego. So Utah's growing quick in biotech, which is why we picked where we did. I mean, even the Pleasant Grove spot, the reason we're building a lab there is that's where a lot of people are moving. Even just in the last 2 weeks, the Huntsman family announced that they're moving the Huntsman Cancer Institute down to Vineyard. And so a lot of people are moving here close by. So
it's going to be so. I think they're going to. Aren't they like making part of Vineyard, Utah City? Is that right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I understand.
I don't really understand what the difference is.
All I know is that Vineyard is pushing hard to bring in some pretty large biotech and just healthcare incentives for these companies to come to Utah County.
And Boston's number one, right?
Boston's number one, and close behind it is San Diego.
I had no idea. I wouldn't have guessed San Diego.
It's a massive area for biotech and healthcare. But Utah's third right behind them. So
interesting. And we do have like this really strong biotech community here in the state. How do we make it number one? Or should that even be our goal? Like why do we punch above our weight? Like we're talking about Boston, like the city is almost as big as our entire state. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why are we good at this? This doesn't make sense.
It's a good question. My personal opinion is biased, but I think it's because of our university settings. I said earlier that like 99% of biotech innovation comes from the university setting. And it's why you see areas like Boston do so well, is because they have Harvard and MIT and these phenomenal universities that are creating incredible technology. BYU and Utah University are getting there in terms of being able to compete and produce exciting technology. And a lot of people then ask the questions like, why? What did they do different that it's allowing innovation happen? And it's actually through their tech transfer offices. So BYU specifically basically sat down and said, how do we make sure that the professors here and the students are incentivized to innovate? And they basically came and said, all right, we're going to wipe almost all of our fees and basically make it almost free to commercialize technology for the university. Most universities would say, hey, if a technology is coming from our university, we by default get 50% of it. We're never going to assign the IP to you. You just have a license agreement, and it makes it nearly impossible to ever commercialize that technology. BYU just says we will fully assign it to you. No fees are due for 3 years. And all we ask is for a 5% common share in the company, which is absurd to most universities. Now it's interesting because they do that. The University of Utah has similar stuff. And you're starting to see phenomenal innovation come from these universities, and you're seeing a lot of funding. People want to be a part of it. I actually think if your biotech sector is growing, it's actually driven by your education system.
Right. That's very much a university thing. And you guys came out of BYU, right?
We did,
so do they have the 5%? And
Yep. So they came out of BYU when we set up our entity. They said, we will fully assign the IP to you, which is great, right? It means we wholly own it. And they're just 5% equity holders. So when we raise, they take a dilution just like everybody else. And they are a phenomenal university to work with in terms of getting technology out.
Yeah. What about like the VC ecosystem, venture capital? It does seem like biotech, because we talked about it earlier, it takes 3 to 5 years to actually kind of get it.
It's a very different kind of raise policy or whatever. Like investors in our space need to be very used to their returns coming from an exit. And diagnostics is easier. Therapeutics is wild. When investors invest into therapeutic companies, they know that company is most likely never going to generate any revenue, even if it's a successful company.
That's
just because of
the goal is to get acquired.
The goal is to get acquired. Yep. So you're going to put it, if it's from the day it was a startup to the day it gets acquired, you're going to put in about $1 billion in investment, and you're never ever going to generate revenue. It is an insane model. For us, it's a little different. We do get to generate revenues earlier, and we've been generating revenues. But it's a very different, pitch. People have to trust your science way more than they trust your revenues, which I would say in Utah, that is kind of an area that's behind. So we're very good at investing in the SaaS and fintech and all that stuff. We found when we did our raise, most of our money did not come from Utah. And it was because people had a hard time wrapping their mind around that investment structure. But I think it'll come. I think you just need, some successful exits, and people just need to understand how that investment thesis looks.
We don't really have funds set up for bio.
We don't.
That I can think of.
There's a couple. I think the biggest fund in Utah for it is Epic Ventures. It was a spin out of Utah. But they're kind of the biggest one. All the other ones are small seed stage stuff. So hopefully it'll get coming. But that is something we saw, is any of the funds that invested into us came outside of Utah. There weren't any Utah based funds that would take a look at it. So that's something that the biotech community could use but again, like, it's kind of like, so what, you have to raise outside of Utah at the same time. So a lot of people would say it's actually a benefit if you're bringing funds from outside of Utah that come in and you show them that you're successful, it'll bring more money into the state, and more people will want to create funds rather than it being an internal fund, having it be a bigger fund that includes other groups outside the state. I don't think is a negative. It just takes time and it makes it harder to raise. I'd say we are pretty good for seed stage stuff right now. It's more like Series A and on that you almost 100% need to go out of the state to get your funding.
But these are big funds anyways, right? That you're raising from. Like,
I mean, I think the smallest fund was a $200 million fund. So, I mean, they're large funds, and it's because of that. It's because they know their average check size is usually anywhere between 5 and 50 million, just because they know you're going to need a lot of spend to get to your next milestone.
Right. That's wild.
Yeah.
That's actually crazy. What do you read? Tell us like what you read as like a CEO. Give us some reading recommendations.
You know what? So I like listening to a lot of podcasts, but I just read scientific articles. So I love to follow. There's different just journals throughout the country that follow, and that's actually what I usually read. Is every day I get an email from one of these outlets that basically says, "Here's the new research that's been published today," and I like reading about it just from an innovation standpoint, but also understanding like how our products fit. But there's new innovation that comes out every day. So that's what I love to read and listen to and understand. There's a couple podcasts that will just kind of recap research that's happened over the last month or quarter. And that's what I like.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's super nerdy.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's basically that and ESPN and Sports Center. That's like the main things I listen to.
What's your sport? What sport do you like?
I love basketball and football. So basketball and football are like ingrained in my family. So I married Chad Lewis's daughter. So my wife, Sarah. So we love BYU. So a lot of football in my family. So Matt Bushman's a brother-in-law. He had an awesome career at BYU.
Yeah, I had no idea you're Chad.
So
I love Chad.
There's that side. And then my family, we love basketball. So I like college basketball more than I like the NBA, but I follow all of it. But yeah,
what are you thinking about BYU next year?
Basketball or football?
Basketball.
Oh, I think
in particular, I think football is going to be great, but like we've never really been good at basketball. That's weird.
We've always had like random teams that, became a Cinderella team.
Yeah, right? Like a Jimmer. Jimmer.
And even Jimmer was fantastic, but that was still like a Cinderella run.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
It's going to be fun to watch. We've never had a situation where we have the talent that we're recruiting now. And everyone's like, oh, how are they going to gel together? I don't know. I think it's way better. I'm like, hey, I'd much rather have this than what we had before. So
for sure.
Yeah. And I think Coach Young did a phenomenal job this past year. So I'm excited. Yeah.
Do you follow like the Jazz at all or?
A little bit. Yeah.
Disappointing.
Yeah. It was a terrible year.
Disappointing.
But I think who knows? Maybe we'll get Cooper Flag. So.
Yeah. If we got that, well worth it.
Yeah. Makes it worth it. Even though we got fined for tanking, who cares?
Yeah. Who cares? that league, that is why college sports in so many ways is better than pro sports.
Yeah, it's fun.
Because you really are in pro sports sometimes incentivized doing the right thing by tanking. Like you're doing the right thing by tanking.
Yeah.
In college, like that doesn't exist. There's no.
It doesn't help you at all.
Yeah, there's no
help. It
help.
will always hurt you and damage you. Yeah. So I don't know. I think that's why I love college. It's you basically know every year you're getting a new team, and that can be annoying, but I think it's exciting.
Yeah. So say like 5-10 years from now, where do you think the company is?
So we want Renew to be around long term. We're not building this to exit. We envision basically building one of the largest clinical labs in Utah based off the technology we use. So it's kind of a newer technology in the lab space. It's called nanopore technology. We want to be the biggest nanopore provider in the world, and that's what we want to grow. We think some of our clinical assays, like this neurodegenerative disease assay, and we've got a few others in the pipeline, like for women's health or Lyme's disease or bacterial infections, things like that. We want to continue to just create assays, launch them, scale them, and have them developed in our lab. So that's what we want to grow.
What else should we know about you in the company?
Something unique about our structures, we love to incentivize innovation. Some investors have literally turned us down because of the way we incentivize our own employees and even students from universities around.
Interesting. How do you do it?
So Renew, we own all of our innovations as separate subsidiaries under our company. A lot of people are like, well, why would you do that? Well, you can say that there's incentive to make it so if we sell something off or license it, it's a little easier to kind of peel that off and send it off. But it's actually because all of our innovations have come from either students in a university setting or our own employees. And every time someone comes up with a new technology that we believe can be commercialized, we set up a new entity and we'll give them up to 50% of that entity. And everyone's like, why would you do that? They were an employee of yours during that whole time they developed that product. Why are you giving them any of that? And it's because we believe that if you don't incentivize innovation, you will just stop coming up with new technology. So
that is kind of wild. I don't know if I've ever heard it like so, that is pretty wild. So you're giving them 50%, but do you guys still have control?
Yep. So we always we always still maintain control. So we'll set up a board. We make sure we maintain control so we can guide kind of the outcome of the technology. And then we set up clauses there too, where it's like, hey, if they choose to leave or not, focus on it, then we can claw some of it back. But largely, we give very big chunks of that.
That's product. Incredible. That's actually really cool.
And yeah, we've loved it. A lot of people be like, well, you want more revenue to come back to the company. And I'm like, I think it's more important that you focus on innovation, and that's what we care about. So we have kind of 3 values in our company. It's innovation, impact, and integrity. And that structure is kind of the whole way we've been able to like have some pretty cool innovation come out from employees or students or whoever it is.
Talk to me about the integrity part, because I think you've covered the other 2 here, but tell me what you're thinking on
the integrity part is because one of the bummers about healthcare is once you get through the regulatory approval process, the hurdle for competition is so high that you have a monopoly unlike any other industry, in my opinion.
Right.
So you see drugs that are making a killing on something that is saving someone's life, right? There's sick people that are paying you because they don't want to die. And we don't want to develop a technology that follows that same model where we're just making as much money as we possibly can just because no one can stop us. And so that was a big reason why we started with that integrity piece of the company, is because we want to make sure when we're building products, it's to save lives. It's not to be a billionaire, right?
Right.
So that was a big part of it. And then it's just kind of been ingrained in the company as a whole, where we have open PTO policies. We don't track your hours. Everybody is technically a salaried employee from like interns all the way up. And it's because we want people to, commit to working and have the integrity to get their tasks done. And we're not going to manage you. But from a higher level, it's, making sure our company's goals are aligned with how we want to help people, not take advantage of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Finally, we talk a lot about the chances one gives is just as important as the chances one takes. When you hear that, who gave you a chance to get you to where you are today?
2 people come to mind. So one is the professor that I work with. So we co-founded the company together. He's one of the best professors in the world, right? He was willing to see a student that came to him and said, hey, I have this big, bold idea. I need someone to help me push the research forward. And he said, go for it. A lot of professors wouldn't have let me do that. As a young undergrad who had no idea what he was doing, they would have said, nope, just keep washing dishes. And, when you're a graduate student, we can talk about it. So he was a big mentor of mine that basically pushed me to think outside of the box. And every time I had new ideas, he was willing to kind of fuel them with me and help me achieve them. And he was willing to give me all the credit for all that stuff. That was one. And then when it came to, we were ready to fund our research, both me and Tim, who's an associate professor at BYU, we had gotten to a point where we needed about $1 million to fund our proof of concept. So this is this point where it was like, whoever's given us this $1 million needs to know that there are high odds that you are never going to see that $1 million ever again. And so our seed round investors came from a group called Union Capital Partners. So Brad Randall and Garrett Fuller. And basically they'll tell anybody to this day, like, they met me from a BYU class. I pitched my narrative to them. And at the time I didn't know, but now I know. They were like, there's no chance this works out. They were like, they were so skeptical because I'm basically sitting there saying, hey, we can develop this blood test that can detect any neurodegenerative disease. And they're like, that's a long shot. Like, this is a PowerPoint. You don't have any validation. But they'll say that they took a chance on me as an individual. And it obviously worked out well for them, but I'd say they were the ones that gave me a real chance to develop the technology. And then my co-founder gave me a real chance to, you know, kind of push the research and support me on it and all that.
It's unbelievable, man. Seriously, I highly recommend everybody check out what you're doing. Again, you're doing one of these companies that, you know, can legitimately change the world for the better.
Yeah, that's
and we should be cheering those types of companies on all day long. So thank you for doing that. Thanks for coming on, Chad. Seriously, what an honor.